What is up, guys? Your agent Tyler Rung here, and today I'm going to be walking you guys through a resource that I created in much due to all of the questions that you guys have reached out to me on, but specifically around how to evaluate a HELOC lender. I've included this guide and exactly how to use it in my latest book, Unlocking Millions, the ultimate guide to using and investing with the HELOC that can be purchased here. And I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check it out there as well. But in this video, I'm going to walk you guys through the guide for those maybe on a budget or maybe those who just prefer video content. But by now, I'm sure you guys understand that there are countless different flavors and types of the HELOC. So it's very important that you ask the right questions so that you know what you're getting yourself into before you actually sign up and open that HELOC on your home. So to use this, you're going to call at least 3 lenders and fill this out for each one of them. And then when you get done with all 3, you'll be able to lay these out on the table or on your computer and look at them objectively and make a decision based on the right HELOC for you. So for starters, I like to open up the conversation, just letting them know that I'm somewhat familiar with their HELOC, but I'm hoping that they have a couple minutes for me to ask all the questions associated for me to feel comfortable with understanding what kind of HELOC they provide. And then I also like to make sure I get the person's name that I'm talking with just for conversational purposes, to drop that in, and then to also just document in case you have any specific questions, you can call that lender back and ask specifically to that resource by name. So one of my first questions is, what is the loan to value? You know, are you able to get 80% LTV, 75% on investment properties, up to 90% on a primary residence? This is just a good opener to get the conversation going, and then so you document that here, usually in the form of a percentage. Then I want to know what kind of fees are associated with opening this account up. This market is super competitive, so a lot of HELOC lenders are willing to open these up with no fees out of pocket. So it's important if you are talking to someone who does require fees that you understand what those are, and so you can factor that into your decision making once you've talked to 3 lenders. These fees typically are either origination fees to at least get the process started, so somewhere in the $50 range for that, and then closing costs. You really want to try to avoid closing costs, like I said, because there are so many lenders out there, you can likely get away from this. But if they do require them, just document it here and move on to the next step. So once you have your total startup costs associated with opening the account, then we want to understand what kind of ongoing costs are associated with keeping the account open. One of the most common fees in this area is the yearly maintenance fee. I actually have a yearly maintenance fee on all of my HELOCs, and I'm totally okay with paying this. I think on the high end, I have a $150 per year maintenance fee, and on the low end, I think it's $55. But like I said, I associate this to an opportunity cost of not having access to these funds, and so I'm totally open to paying this fee. But again, you want to know exactly what that fee is. The next fees that we call out here are just some common ones that I've seen out there. I don't like any of these, but I am willing to deal with some of them, just depending. So you want to kind of just understand what other fees are associated with this HELOC. So a prepayment fee or early termination could be associated with opening this account using the funds and then having to pay a fee if you actually close it early or you pay the balance off too soon. You especially don't want either one of these fees if you're going to use the HELOC like we advise on this channel and in our book, to pay it off quickly and to use it as short-term financing over and over again. So as you guys see, those fees can get you every time, and you want to try to avoid those. Inactivity fee, I don't like this one either because we open a HELOC to give us options. We don't want to be forced into using it or pay a fee to do that. So again, I do not like the inactivity fee either. So I'm really hoping to leave this section with only identifying a yearly maintenance fee associated with the HELOC, and I'm able to get around all other fees in this section. Okay, those are what I've been able to do successfully, and I advise you to try to find products like that as well. But lastly, before we leave this section, I always like to leave it open for them to provide any additional information on questions that I didn't ask. And be sure to document those because, like I said, everybody has their own unique flavor and twist they like to put on this, so this is a good opportunity to capture that information here. So that does it for the initial information, and next we move on to the draw period. And the draw period is typically an amount of time where you are able to draw on the HELOC, or in other words, pull money out on the HELOC, as opposed to the next period that we'll learn about here in just a minute called the repayment period. Once you exit the draw period and enter the repayment period, you can no longer withdraw funds, but rather only pay down the principal balance that you have open. So with that, let's focus on the draw period during this section. And first, we want to ask, how long is it? In most cases, it is a 10-year period with a 20-year repayment period. But again, we just want to document that here. Then we also want to start opening up the conversation and talking about, how do I withdraw these funds? Am I getting a separate debit card? Am I getting a separate checkbook, or just an account that I can transfer into my checking account? But you want to know how you're going to be able to get these funds so you can be prepared to use it accordingly when it's time to make that withdrawal. Next, we want to know if there's a required average balance. This is a big no-no for me. Again, I like to use this HELOC to be flexible, not be pushed in any direction to use it. So again, document that here, but that is not something we want to see on here. Then we want to know about the payments. So typically during the draw period, payments on the HELOC are interest only. Sometimes you're able to find one that is principal and interest, but you want to document that here and be aware. And we also want to know on the front end that those payments we're going to make are interest only, and we don't assume that it's paying down the balance on that product. Next, before we get into interest rates, we're going to open up and ask the question if there are any introductory rates or special rates associated with opening up a new account. Now, this is kind of just like icing on the cake. This usually doesn't sway my opinion one way or the other, but sometimes I have been able to get a really good rate locked in for 6 months because I've opened an account in a particular time frame. So always a good question to ask, but again, this one doesn't hold a lot of weight for me. Next, we're going to get into the big question here, and that's asking about if the rate on this HELOC is variable. Now, 9 times out of 10, it is going to be variable, but if you do happen to find a fixed rate HELOC, that's one you're going to want to pay special attention to and weight that question very highly when you're going to evaluate these against those other lenders. But we're going to assume that it is going to be variable and continue on to these next set of questions, just digging a little deeper and understanding, even though it's variable, let's learn a little bit more about how that works. So first, assuming it's variable, we want to know, are there short-term rate locks? A couple of my HELOCs allow you to lock in a rate for 4 to 6 months before it resets and updates to the current market rate. Not available on all of them, but again, a good question to ask. Next, we want to know how often this rate adjusts. A typical answer here is monthly, but again, just want to document whatever they tell you so you can be prepared to follow the market and be aware when that payment is going to adjust. And then we want to know if there's a rate cap or a max rate that we can adjust up to, so that in a worst case situation where we can't pay this off as planned, we know what our max payment's going to be. Again, not everyone has these, but you do want to know kind of what the upper threshold is going to be in a worst case situation. All right, moving on to the repayment period. Again, this is the period where you no longer make withdrawals from the HELOC, but you just have an open balance that you start to pay principal and interest payments into. But that's the first question we want to confirm. If the draw period was interest only, we want to confirm that that payment does convert over to a principal and interest payment, so there aren't any balloons due at the end of this loan. So that's the question we want to confirm next is, will my balance be zero at the end of making all of these payments? Those are kind of 2 ways to ask the same question, but again, you just want to double confirm here of what this repayment period looks like. Next, we want to know how long this repayment period is going to be. Like I said before, most times it's 20 years, but I have seen a little bit shorter and longer. So again, just good to know on the front end. And lastly, we want to know about the interest rate during the repayment period. Again, typically the draw period is variable, but I see a lot of them swap over to a fixed rate when they move into the repayment period. But we want to know how that happens. Do they take the last rate that was variable prior to it going into repayment, or do they take a different set of rates? So you want to know just a little bit about that process and confirm that it is going to be fixed and you're not going to continue into variable payments throughout the repayment period. And then we end it with asking if there's anything else that we should know about your HELOC product that we didn't already ask you, and be sure to document that here. But like I said, it's very difficult to predict how thousands of different lenders are going to build their products and ask questions during their underwriting cycle. So this is just a guide to get you to an objective format to evaluate these. But I do go into a much deeper detail in the book if you are interested in getting that. And we talk about all things investing in real estate with the HELOC, best practices with the HELOC, and examples and diagrams in general, talking all things HELOC. Link in the description below. But with that, guys, if you got any value out of this, I would appreciate a like, subscribe, or share with someone else who might appreciate it as well. But with that, guys, I'm Tyler Wayrong, and we'll catch you next time.